Saying something makes an ass out of you and me. I believe this. I still assume things. I was reading the book by Steven Pinker called How the Mind Works. Steven Pinker calls his book How the Mind Works. He still uses the word mind. This is a concept from Greek mythology when they still thought that the heart was responsible for thoughts. Quoting from Steven Pinker's book, as the famous behaviorist B.F. Skinner said, the question is not whether machines think, but whether men do. He was joking. He was frustrated that every criticism showed complete misunderstanding. Steven Pinker goes on to criticize with complete misunderstanding. Of course men and women do think. A behaviorist would never deny that. The stimulus response theory turned out to be wrong. He asserts that it is wrong. This is the same assertions that Noam Chomsky, Ayn Rand, and every other criticism said. They said it was wrong. They never gave any evidence whatsoever, or they completely misunderstood. He calls it stimulus response psychology. A behaviorist says there are 6 causes for human behavior: genetic endowment, prenatal chemical environment, postnatal chemical environment, Pavlovian conditioning, Skinnerian conditioning, and traumatic factors. Pavlovian conditioning involves stimulus response. Skinnerian conditioning, stimulus response consequence. Consequence like natural selection. It has nothing whatsoever to do with stimulus response. It's far more complicated than that, and his criticism is wrong, but he calls the theory wrong. So people buy the book and they think, well, this is a scientist. Well, he's not really a scientist because he doesn't do data-driven analysis. He doesn't understand behaviorism, so he pretty much is wrong, but people can't admit they're wrong because they were conditioned to think they're right. It's a very complicated thing, but yes, Skinner's comment was in frustration to people calling him wrong when he was right. Pinker goes on to say that a belief causes behavior. This is one of our cultural presuppositions. We assume thoughts cause behavior. Sometimes when you think something, you do it as well. A behaviorist would explain that the pairing of you thinking something and doing something would make you attribute causal effect to it. That is exactly what happens. A behaviorist would never predict behavior because there are way too many variables. Steven Pinker assumes that a behaviorist should predict, still going through puberty. Steven Pinker assumes if a thought caused behavior, I would articulate that very well because I was thinking very well, but I was not able to speak very well. Further evidence that a thought does not cause behavior. Once in a while, a thought goes along with behavior. A behaviorist would explain that the pairing of the two would make a person attribute causal effect to the thought. The fact that this occurs on an intermittent schedule would maintain the behavior. That is exactly what happens. Behaviorists are right. Steven Pinker is wrong. Steven Pinker says behaviorists are wrong. He is wrong. If a thought caused behavior, when I thought that I was going upstairs, I would go upstairs. Sometimes I do go upstairs. Sometimes I go downstairs. Sometimes I do nothing. A thought is superfluous. It does not cause a behavior, it is an effect. My thoughts are triggered by the environment. The environment also triggers behavior independently. Sometimes they go along together. A person might superstitiously attribute causal effect to a thought. That is exactly what happens. A thought is an effect, not a cause. It's a description. Another cultural assumption is that beliefs cause behavior. And Steven Pinker goes on to make his case by saying that a belief is required to predict behavior. I've seen people believe things and do the exact opposite thing. How does this predict behavior? Jim Bakker believed that having sex with a prostitute caused a person to spend an eternity in hell. Jim Bakker had sex with the prostitute. People believe drinking is wrong, yet they still drink. Well, not wrong, but harmful for them. But people still drink. I believe a person should never assume anything. I still assume things. If a belief was a cause, it would happen 100% of the time. Once in a while, it goes along with what you do. You attribute causal effect to it. That is superstitious behavior. If Steven Pinker understood behaviorism, he would understand superstitious behavior. He does not, so he behaves exactly as would be explained. We don't predict behavior, we explain behavior. There is a big difference. There are way too many variables to ever predict behavior. Every single criticism of behaviorism is taken from people that have asserted that it is obviously wrong, that it is wrong, that it is flawed, that it is warped. People just assert things. They never give evidence, and if they do, it is completely misunderstood. People read the criticisms, they read Noam Chomsky, they read Ayn Rand. Steven Pinker has never read about behaviorism. Never. I would predict that. Behavior doesn't predict. I would explain that. Because B.F. Skinner answers every criticism, no matter how silly. And when he answered it, nobody read him, so he made a joke. And Steven Pinker has no sense of humor, so he didn't get it and uses it against him. Every single assumption that he makes is totally wrong. Evolution could never select a person to have to reason and have a belief system before they behaved. Many people behave with completely different beliefs. Many people behave without beliefs. I do not have to believe something to eat something. Sometimes I eat something and it forms a belief. Sometimes I eat something and it doesn't. Beliefs are an effect and not a cause. They are a description. Until we get an understanding of human behavior, we will not be able to implement effective ways to actually help people. We will keep thinking that the way to fry an egg is to have a belief of how it's done. This is really sad because behavioral technology gives us the tools so people interact with each other and find effective ways at solving problems. Behavioral technology has improved learning skills 100% and increased self-confidence. Steven Pinker's philosophy decreased learning skills and decreased self-confidence. We fund Steven Pinker's way because it reinforces our cultural presuppositions. This is harmful to society. Behavioral technology eliminates criminal behavior. We reinforce creating the victim and then blaming the victim. Short-term positive consequences, long-term negative consequences. Because we do not understand behavioral technology, we tend to perpetuate this system. We need to perpetuate long-term positive consequences. This promotes moral behavior, it promotes personal responsibility, it promotes all the things we value as a culture. And until we understand things, we will not be able to effectively implement a system that will allow us to do this. And the system is not dogmatic. It is does and doesn't. If something doesn't work, you don't do it. If something does, you do it. And if you do the same thing to someone else and it works on one person and doesn't work on another person, you change it. It is not a control thing, it is a way of